So I'd like to make in a bit of an addendum video to the 200t video series that I did. One of the reasons is because a couple of the sequences for reassembly were a little bit out of order. So I'd like to at least correct some of that in video form. Secondly is because I'm going to try something other than milling. Instead of milling the chassis to optimize the squish, instead of taking some off of the deck here, what I figured I'd try is the old Coke can or beer can trick. I don't want to delete the base gasket entirely. The base gasket is about 19 thousandths thick, and this is a used gasket, so I'd assume that a non-used one would be closer to 20. But anyway, so that's about 19 thousandths thick, and the squish as measured on the saw is about somewhere between 35 and 37 thousandths. So if I do a base gasket delete, the squish is going to be too close. It's just going to be too tight. And maybe on these smaller saws you can run a squish like that, that's sub 20 thousandths, but I don't know. I'd rather run a gasket, and maybe this is the ticket. Maybe a 4 thousandths gasket will actually optimize the squish for me. So if you do the math, that's 19 minus 4 thousandths, so you're losing 15 thousandths essentially. Off of a 35 thousand squish, you'll get a 20 thousand squish, maybe a little bit more, which is perfect. So I'm going to cut this out, see how this works. And what we'll ultimately do is, I'm not going to show you the whole reassembly because that's kind of silly. I've already done that. But what I'll do is I'll show a couple of the assembly steps just to clarify things and how to put this back together in the correct order so you don't run into trouble. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hopefully get a report from the guy that runs these as to which one is faster. I'm not going to do any port work on this. I'm going to leave this as is. I may clean up some of the carbon, but I'm going to leave the stock cylinder as is, and I'm going to see if I can get a report from Steve, who is the owner of these saws, to see which one he likes better. So what do you think? How'd I do? So here's a gasket out of a Coke can. And what I did was I actually used a regular old paper hole punch here to punch out the holes, and then took a nice fine pair of scissors and cut this out. So I'll take a couple of the burrs off and then we'll actually install it. So I don't need to show you installing, I'll just put the head down. The first thing that I did wrong in the last video was I actually put the ignition coil down before I put the flywheel down. That's sort of incorrect. What you want to do is you want to get the ignition coil down with the correct wiring before you put the flywheel down. So you can see in here how these wires are routed. The little one goes under the big one, and that all tucks in here right nicely. So I didn't remove any of this. I actually didn't remove the ignition coil for when I was working with this particular saw, but I did want to at least demonstrate how this is properly wired, and then and because this is not moving, I can just cinch this flywheel down. But if you're actually doing this, you want to put the ignition coil down with the correct wiring in place. Do not tighten the ignition coil. You want to then put the flywheel down, tighten that, and then tighten in the ignition coil with the business card in here as a spacer. That's definitely best practice on how to do that. The second mistake that I made was to put the oiler down first and then the wire. That's wrong. This wire goes underneath the oiler just like that. So you can do that before you put the rest of the case on. A little bit of Loctite on here as well, because you really want this to seal up pretty good. They are through hole to the case, to inside the crankcase. There you go. So the next mistake had to do with the muffler. So what I'm going to do is I'm just using a little bit of Loctite here, just as a stickum, for this gasket, because this gasket tends to move. But sticking it on there, I think works pretty good. So now we've got the gasket stuck, and we're going to attempt to put the gas tank here. So the gas tank there is mostly in place, but you don't want to cinch it down before you get the muffler in here. The muffler, it needs the play in order to get down in there properly. So here's the muffler. You don't want to move that gasket out of place either. This whole thing is an exceptionally tight fit. 2 muffler bolts with red Loctite. If you need to move the gasket back into position, you can do that. You can get the bolt holes lined up with a screwdriver. That helps. A little bit of grease on the bolt. 1, 2. Now you can put the rest of the gas tank on. 1, 2, 3, 4. The next mistake that I had made on this was I actually put the intake down too early before this piece was on, but also that this square piece I put on upside down. So let's not do that. We're going to put the intake boot home here, and you got to line it up just right. There it is. And that's how you line it up in there. And then you put this piece down with the ring down first, as opposed the ring is protruding that way. Like that. Press down, work it down, nice and even. Now you have your intake boot down. So the final mistake that I made was I forgot to put this onto here. Now as I was removing this, this was kind of the last thing to go, but based on how kind of tricky this is to get in through here, I think I'll do this first and then I'll add everything else later. As long as we have enough play, which I know that we do. For those of you that were very astute, might have noticed that this bolt in my other video is missing. I think this bolt actually holds in the chain adjuster here, the chain tensioner. So I happen to have an extra bolt left over, couldn't figure out where it went back to the video, sure enough it's missing. So don't forget that bolt. I found another thing I might have missed. So on the other clutch cover there's an E-clip here. Pretty sure the other one didn't have that E-clip. Made my job a lot easier, but I'm going to have to find an E-clip that'll actually fit. So apparently there's an E-clip on the clutch cover, and this piece, the metal bar here, is actually coming out on this one, but and I don't know why, but we got to remove that E-clip in order to, there we go, get the whole thing apart. Got to remember to put it back too. Hopefully that's the final thing that I missed. Those are the mistakes that I made. Again, I'm going to eventually get an opinion from the owner of these saws to see whether or not the performance of this one is equivalent to the other one. So if they are, then I don't have to do very much modification at all on these. So I hope you like this little addendum here, this little update on this project. So if I find anything else that I did wrong, or any other information, of course I'll keep you guys posted. And thank you to the guys on Arborist site that did give me the heads up as to what I was doing wrong here. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.